The Unseen Hunter. On the night of March 6, 1943, U.S. Task Force 68 stealthily advanced on a Japanese base, hunting an enemy they could not see. In the cold, moonless expanse of the Solomon Islands, a silent hunter moved through the darkness. The year was 1943. The 6-month maelstrom around Guadalcanal had finally subsided, leaving the Imperial Japanese Navy bruised and overstretched, forced into a long, bitter retreat. They had once dreamed of advancing on Australia, but now their every waking moment was a scramble to fortify their island strongholds: Kolombangara, New Georgia, Rabaul. Yet even in this retreat, they were not broken. The Japanese retained a terrifying advantage, a deadly mastery of night combat. Their destroyers were swift, their lookouts were legendary, and their long-lance torpedoes were the most lethal weapons in the Pacific. For the American sailors who had faced them at Savo Island and Tassafaronga, the darkness was an enemy in itself, a shroud that had swallowed entire task forces and shattered morale. But something was changing, something that would turn the darkness against those who had so long ruled it. The narrow, reef-choked passage of Blackett Strait was the vital artery for the Tokyo Express, the nightly Japanese supply runs. It was a lifeline for their garrisons, a constant flow of men and material that the Americans knew they had to sever. The stakes were impossibly high. The next Allied offensive, Operation Toenails, was already being planned to seize New Georgia and its crucial airfield at Munda. Any buildup at the nearby Japanese base of Vila would jeopardize everything. And intelligence reports were clear. The Japanese were reinforcing, and they were doing so now. The American fleet, too, had been transformed by the crucible of Guadalcanal. The bitter lessons had been learned, and a new kind of weapon had been introduced: the SG radar. This marvel of engineering, a 10-centimeter surface search set, gave U.S. cruisers and destroyers an unprecedented, almost supernatural ability to see in the dark. It could detect a destroyer at 10 to 12 miles, even through rain and total darkness. For the Japanese, who still relied on human eyes and limited radar, this was a deadly, dangerous asymmetry. As the sun set on March 5, 1943, Task Force 68, led by Rear Admiral Aaron S. Tip Merrill, slipped from Purvis Bay under a cloak of radio silence. His force consisted of 3 brand-new light cruisers, Montpelier, Cleveland, and Denver, and 3 battle-hardened destroyers. Merrill was a quiet, methodical man, and his doctrine was a perfect blend of cautious aggression and technological trust. His crews had been drilled endlessly, not on closing to visual range and risking disaster, but on tracking, classifying, and engaging targets entirely by radar. They were training to fight blind, with a new kind of clarity. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to them, 2 Japanese destroyers, Morosame and Minagumo, had just finished a supply run to Vila and were beginning their journey home. They took the shorter, more dangerous route through Kula Gulf, unaware that they were sailing directly into the jaws of a silent, unseen predator. The trap was set.
A new kind of war. The U.S. Navy, armed with advanced radar and a new doctrine, prepared to challenge Japan's mastery of night combat. The costly lessons of 1942, from the shock of Savo Island to the devastating night of Tassafaronga, had hammered home a grim reality for the United States Navy. Their ships were superior in firepower, but at night, their situational awareness was a disaster. Commanders struggled with poor coordination, friendly fire incidents, and a pervasive inability to find and track their targets in the darkness. Admiral William F. Halsey, the fierce commander of the South Pacific area, was haunted by these losses. He knew that technology alone couldn't win the night. It would take a radical shift in doctrine, a disciplined reliance on a new tool, and a new kind of leader to wield it. Out of this brutal proving ground emerged Rear Admiral Aaron S. Tip Merrill, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a formidable intellect. Merrill understood that the future of night combat lay not in the heroic, but often suicidal, charge into visual range, but in the unseen, lethal clarity of radar. His command, Task Force 68, was a hand-picked instrument of this new warfare. The three Cleveland-class light cruisers, Montpelier, his flagship, Cleveland, and Denver, were a new breed of warship, armed with powerful 6-inch guns and, most importantly, the new SG surface search radar and its intricate fire control systems. The destroyers that screened them, the Waller, Connie, and Conway, were hardened veterans, their crews experts in high-speed maneuvering and torpedo deployment. Merrill's philosophy was simple but revolutionary: fight blind, but with absolute technological clarity. His crews were drilled relentlessly on tracking, classifying, and engaging targets using radar alone. In the plotting rooms and control towers, they became masters of an unseen world, their eyes glued to flickering green screens that revealed a tactical reality invisible to the human eye. Data from the SG radar was continuously refined, turning faint blips into precise coordinates for the gunnery directors. This was a direct rebuke to the old, chaotic ways of fighting. Merrill sought to eliminate the confusion that had plagued past battles, to turn the very darkness that the Japanese relied on into the Americans' greatest weapon. As February bled into March, intelligence reports confirmed the increasing logistical activity around Kolombangara. Allied reconnaissance planes saw new barge traffic, coast watchers noted construction at Vila. The Japanese were building up their forces, preparing to reinforce Munda, the target of the next American invasion. This buildup was a mix of traditional destroyer runs and a new fleet of small, stealthy barges and motor launches. The Japanese, with their logistics fleet decimated, were forced to rely on these fragile lifelines. They believed their geographic knowledge and the cover of night would protect them. They were about to discover that a new, more dangerous force was stalking their waters, one that cared not for moonless skies or shadowy coastlines. For the men of Task Force 68, the lessons of the past were about to be put to the ultimate test.
The First Volley. Admiral Merrill's ships found their target with blinding technological clarity and unleashed a devastating, precise attack. At precisely 0:57 on March 6th, the quiet hum of the instrument panels aboard Merrill's cruisers was broken by a sudden spike of life. In the dark plotting rooms, a ghostly contact appeared on the radar screens. It was a single, stationary blip at first, a return that could have been a small island. But within moments, the blip moved, then split in two. The blood of the operators ran cold with an electrifying thrill. They were not just hunting, they had found their prey. The two blips were closing rapidly, and at a range of approximately 11,000 yards, their signatures confirmed the worst fears: two enemy destroyers sailing directly into their path. Aboard the Japanese destroyers Murasame and Minagumo, there was no such confirmation, no warning. Their crews, experienced and confident in the Imperial Navy's mastery of the night, were unaware they were now nothing more than silent targets in a technological gun sight. In the darkened control rooms of Task Force 68, the silence was tense and absolute. The fate of the ships in the mission now lay in the hands of the radar plotters. With practiced hands, they calculated final solutions, their concentration a tangible force in the enclosed space. The hum of the electrical gear was the only sound, a low vibration of immense power waiting to be unleashed. The order came, sharp and terse: stand by to commence firing. It was not a command shouted across the bridge, but a calm, professional transmission. At 01, the night was torn asunder. All three American cruisers, Montpelier, Cleveland, and Denver, unleashed their starboard batteries in a coordinated, blinding fury. Their 6-inch shells arced silently through the darkness, a deadly rain that descended from an unseen sky. The lead Japanese destroyer, Murasame, was the first target, and in accordance with Merrill's doctrine, all American guns converged on her. Within moments, she was bracketed by colossal geysers of water. Then came the hits.
The sixth salvo struck with devastating effect, transforming the destroyer into a blossoming sphere of fire and secondary explosions. The very air shook with the violence of it. Simultaneously, the USS Waller launched a volley of 5 torpedoes. At least one of them found its mark, a catastrophic blow that erupted just as the shell hits had engulfed the ship. In less than 15 minutes, the Munasame had been utterly annihilated, her existence as a fighting unit erased. Aboard the Minagumo, her captain, Lieutenant Commander Tokuno, ordered desperate evasive action, weaving past the burning wreck of his sister ship. But it was no use. The American fire control radar had already shifted its focus. Within minutes, the Minaguma was ablaze, her engines dead, her decks a slaughterhouse. She had been hit repeatedly, a victim of an enemy she couldn't even see. The Japanese, the once unrivaled masters of the night, had lost 2 frontline destroyers without landing a single effective shot in return.
A turning point. The battle's aftermath revealed a decisive American victory and forever changed the balance of power in the Pacific. With the Japanese destroyers neutralized, Task Force 68's mission was far from over. The primary objective remained, the bombardment of the Japanese base at Villa. For the American sailors, the adrenaline of the short, brutal naval engagement was now replaced by the methodical, calculated work of a shore bombardment. Merrill ordered his force to alter course, forming a line-ahead formation to maximize their gunnery effectiveness. This placed the cruisers approximately 2 miles off the Kolombangara coastline, near Tungarili Point, a stone's throw from the enemy. At 0124, the bombardment began. Each cruiser fired in a measured, synchronized sequence, their powerful guns sending a storm of high-explosive shells hurtling toward pre-assigned coordinates. The Montpelier targeted supply dumps and aircraft dispersal zones. The Cleveland and Denver focused their fire on runways, fuel stores, and troop bivouacs. This wasn't a wild, speculative barrage. It was an act of surgical precision, directed by synchronized radar and refined by a Black Cat patrol flying overhead. The sheer volume of fire was immense, but its delivery was cold and professional. The Japanese shore batteries, likely caught off guard by the sudden loss of their destroyer escort, responded sluggishly. Their sporadic rounds were no match for the cruiser's counter-battery fire, which, with the help of flash detection and radar-directed return volleys, quickly silenced 2 known gun pits. Observers in the Black Cat reported secondary explosions, a clear sign of successful hits on fuel and ammunition zones. In 16 minutes, Task Force 68 had expended a substantial portion of its ammunition. At 0140, the mission was complete. Merrill ordered his force to reverse course and withdraw, their work in the darkness finished. Merrill's report to Admiral Halsey the next morning was a moment of quiet triumph. Although he had mistakenly classified the sunk destroyers as 2 light cruisers, the result was undeniable. 2 frontline Japanese destroyers were gone, the shore facilities at Villa were damaged, and not a single U.S. ship had been hit. It was a victory unlike any other. For the U.S. Navy, the Battle of Blackett Strait was a tactical affirmation of their new radar-directed doctrine. It showed that with discipline, coordination, and technology, they could now hunt and kill the masters of the night. For the Japanese, the engagement was a sobering, terrifying warning. Their navy, once confident in its night-fighting supremacy, had lost 2 ships without ever getting a shot off. It raised difficult questions for commanders in Rabaul and Tokyo about the security of their supply routes and the reliability of their long-held doctrines. The battle marked a turning point. The balance of power in night fighting was finally shifting. The Japanese had lost 2 frontline destroyers, and the Americans, armed with their new technological clarity, had delivered a clean, decisive blow. While the strait remained contested, the message of the Battle of Blackett Strait was clear. The Pacific War had entered a new phase, and the American Navy was now the hunter in the dark. The Battle of Blackett Strait was more than a mere naval skirmish. It was a watershed moment that marked the end of an era and the beginning of another. For years, the Japanese Imperial Navy held an almost mythical dominance over the dark seas of the Pacific.
Their skill, their deadly torpedoes, and their willingness to engage in the chaotic fury of night combat had granted them a terrifying psychological edge. But technology, a cold and relentless master, was now changing the rules of the game. The U.S. Navy, forged in the fires of Guadalcanal and haunted by its losses, had learned to harness this new power. The SG radar wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was a symbol of a new doctrine, a new way of fighting that valued calculated precision over reckless bravery. The disciplined execution of Merrill's Task Force 68 proved that the era of relying on human eyes and instinct alone was over. The night was no longer a safe haven for the Tokyo Express. It was now a trap, a technological ambush from which there was no escape. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. For the Americans, it was a long-awaited sign that their sacrifices and hard-won lessons were paying off. For the Japanese, it was a stark, brutal warning that their long-held advantage had been shattered in a single, silent night. It raised difficult questions for commanders in Rabaul and Tokyo about the security of their supply routes and the reliability of their long-held doctrines. The battle marked a turning point. The balance of power in night fighting was finally shifting. The Japanese had lost 2 frontline destroyers, and the Americans, armed with their new technological clarity, had delivered a clean, decisive blow. While the strait remained contested, the message of the Battle of Blackett Strait was clear. The Pacific War had entered a new phase, and the American Navy was now the hunter in the dark. The Battle of Blackett Strait was more than a mere naval skirmish. It was a watershed moment that marked the end of an era and the beginning of another. For years, the Japanese Imperial Navy had held an almost mythical dominance over the dark seas of the Pacific. Their skill, their deadly torpedoes, and their willingness to engage in the chaotic fury of night combat had granted them a terrifying psychological edge. But technology, a cold and relentless master, was now changing the rules of the game. The U.S. Navy, forged in the fires of Guadalcanal and haunted by its losses, had learned to harness this new power. The SG radar wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was a symbol of a new doctrine, a new way of fighting that valued calculated precision over reckless bravery. The disciplined execution of Merrill's Task Force 68 proved that the era of relying on human eyes and instinct alone was over. The night was no longer a safe haven for the Tokyo Express. It was now a trap, a technological ambush from which there was no escape. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. For the Americans, it was a long-awaited sign that their sacrifices and hard-won lessons were paying off. For the Japanese, it was a stark, brutal warning that their long-held advantage had been shattered in a single, silent night. The legacy of the battle would echo for the rest of the war as the U.S. Navy continued to perfect its lethal, unseen hunting tactics. The Battle of Blackett Strait wasn't just a victory, it was a promise, the promise that the American sun was rising, even in the darkest hours.